the Lighthouse on Widow's Keep. Even among us seasoned keepers, that name carried a certain weight, a shiver distinct from the raw bite of the Atlantic wind. It wasn't the famed storms or the jagged ship-hungry rocks that gave it its reputation, but something far more insidious, something you couldn't quite grasp, couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the deep, pervasive silence that seemed to press in, swallowing every sound, leaving only the relentless thrum of one's own thoughts to fill the cold stone tower. My name is Thomas O'Malley, and I am the latest in a long and often tragically short line of men assigned to this lonely vigil. When I first arrived, fresh from the mainland's cacophony, the quiet was a welcome balm. The stillness, a profound relief. But it wasn't long before that balm began to feel like a shroud. My predecessor, a man named Silas, vanished on his watch. He left everything behind, his meager belongings, his clothes, hygiene kit, and 2 books, Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms and his journal. Search and rescue operations yielded nothing but more questions. His journal wasn't the official log, filled with mundane observations of weather and lamp function, but a personal one, bound in weathered leather. Its pages were filled with a spidery script that spoke of a growing unease. Silas's early entries mirrored my own initial contentment, an appreciation for solitude, and the stark beauty of the endless horizon. But as the weeks bled into months, a subtle shift occurred in his writing. He began to note the silence, not as an absence of noise, but as a tangible presence. He described it as a weight, a pressure against his ears. He wrote of the lamp, our steadfast beacon, developing a subtle hum, a resonance that seemed to vibrate not through the air, but directly within his bones. It wasn't loud, often barely perceptible above the crashing waves, but it was constant, a low thrumming that intensified during the long, solitary nights. He'd meticulously check the mechanism, almost obsessively clean the lens, but the hum always persisted. Eventually, he simply tallied it up as an intrinsic, unsettling part of the light itself. His later entries grew increasingly fragmented, punctuated by ellipses and question marks. He wrote of finding objects moved, a book on a different shelf, a tool inexplicably relocated. Always small things, easily dismissed as a trick of the light or a lapse in memory. But the frequency increased, and the unsettling feeling that he wasn't truly alone in the tower began to seep into his words, a cold dread that mirrored my own growing unease. My days at Widow's Keep trudged on, a monotonous rhythm of operating the lamp, cleaning the lens, maintaining the structure, and reporting the weather. Then came that Sunday. At dawn, I set the lamp in motion, the mechanical whir of familiar comfort. But my clockwork routine began to exhibit deviations. More often, I'd have to extinguish the lamp to refill the oil, an inexplicable influx of oil being burned. I couldn't explain it, just chalked it up to some naturally occurring phenomenon, a peculiar quirk of the light. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to any vessel within range, and to Coast Guard operations. This is Keeper Thomas O'Malley, Widow's Keep Lighthouse. Visibility 3 nautical miles in light fog. Wind from the northwest at 15 knots. Sea state, moderate chop, rough with 6-foot swells. It was a mundane task, broadcasting weather reports every 3 hours, a one-way conversation into the dark, indifferent deep. Never an acknowledgement, never a response. But it was the job. One night, after a particularly disappointing dinner of canned meat and potatoes, I scraped the remains into the waste bin and shuffled towards the radio. I'd forgotten to broadcast the evening weather report. As I finished, a faint, odd crackle sounded from the speaker, then a voice.
S from Urang Medan. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead. I die.
I froze, my hand hovering over the microphone. A horrific dread washed over me. Urang Medan? The Dutch freighter? The ghost ship of the late 1940s? My uncle, a grizzled old sailor, had spun the tale one night after returning from port, his voice low and conspiratorial. He'd explained the incident, a chilling maritime legend. In the late 1940s, several ships in the Strait of Malacca supposedly picked up a bizarre and fragmented Morse code distress call from that very Dutch freighter. The message, from a dying radio operator, began exactly as I had just heard it, S. All officers, including Captain dead, lying in chart room and on the bridge, probably whole of crew dead. Then, as my uncle recounted, it would devolve into an unintelligible series of frantic dots and dashes, culminating in that final, horrifying statement, "I die." The story continued with the discovery of the doomed ship. An American vessel, the Silver Star, reportedly responded, finding a scene of utter horror. My uncle's description was vivid. The entire crew, including the ship's dog, dead, sprawled across the decks, in the mess hall, on the bridge, the radio operator at his post, hands still on the key. No visible injuries, but their faces were contorted in grotesque expressions of terror, eyes wide, mouths agape, arms outstretched, as if they had died in a moment of extreme fear or agony. Even the dog was frozen in a snarl, and the ship itself seemed perfectly intact. Before the Silver Star's crew could thoroughly investigate, a mysterious fire reportedly broke out in the Orang Medan's cargo hold. The Silver Star crew was forced to evacuate, and moments later, the Orang Medan exploded violently, sinking beneath the waves, taking all potential evidence with it and leaving behind only questions. And now, something, or someone, was broadcasting that very transmission from my own radio. Was it just a bored radio operator on a cargo ship playing a cruel joke? My blood ran cold, and the hum of the lighthouse seemed to intensify, vibrating not in the air, but deep within my very bones. The silence of Widow's Reef was no longer an absence of sound. It was a hungry, palpable presence, holding its breath, waiting. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to dismiss the chilling transmission, to rationalize it away as a cruel prank from a bored seaman, a glitch in the aging radio equipment, or perhaps simply a manifestation of my own fraying nerves. But the details were too precise, too chillingly familiar. My uncle's words, whispered across a dimly lit tavern table years ago, now echoed in the confined space of the lamp room with terrifying clarity, each syllable a hammer blow against my composure. My hand, clammy with sudden dread, gripped the microphone. I took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting the tremor that threatened to seize my voice. I tightened my grip on the microphone, the cold metal biting into my palm as I tried to steady my racing heart. The storm outside mirrored my turmoil, each roar of thunder adding to the ambiance of dread that hung in the air. What if the transmission was real? An echo from the past, reaching out through time. I could almost hear my uncle's voice in my head, recounting the tale with reverent awe. Just then, another crackle from the radio jolted me back to the present, a ghostly repeat of the earlier Morse code. My breath hitched, and I fought against the urge to flee from the lamp room, trying to ground myself in reality and dismiss the haunting echoes. "This isn't happening," I whispered, but the faint repeating signal was relentless, pulling me deeper into the mystery. Memories of my uncle's stories flooded my mind, each detail sharpening my senses. I hesitated, weighing my next move as the wind howled like a vengeful spirit outside, threatening to tear the tiny structure apart. This wasn't just a tale for the tavern anymore. This was a calling, and part of me knew I had to respond. My uncle's words, whispered across a dimly lit tavern table years ago, now echoed in the confined space of the lamp room with terrifying clarity, each syllable a hammer blow against my composure. My hand, clammy with sudden dread, gripped the microphone. I took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting the tremor that threatened to seize my voice. This was Channel 16, the International Distress Channel. Every vessel, every coastal station, was mandated to monitor it. If this was a joke, it was an incredibly dangerous and unconscionable one. But if it wasn't, the implications were unthinkable. I forced out, my voice sounding impossibly raspy in the sudden quiet. "Widows Keep Lighthouse. Identify yourself. Repeat. Identify yourself. Over." Silence. An unnerving, profound silence. Only the soft hiss of static from the speaker. The hum. Was it always this resonant? Or was my mind, already pushed to its limits by the isolation, playing cruel tricks, composing a sinister symphony to my dread? Seconds stretched into an eternity. Had the signal finally cut out? Had whoever sent it realized the sheer magnitude of their folly, or the horrifying implications of their message? Then, the crackle returned, sharper and more insistent this time, like a brittle thread snapping. And the voice. It wasn't the strong, clear cadence of a typical maritime radio operator. It was distorted, thin, as if being pulled through an immense distance, or perhaps through the very fabric of time itself.
Orang Medan. Adrift. Bodies. The fear.
The words were broken, fragmented, heavily laced with static, but the meaning was unmistakable. It wasn't merely repeating the initial message verbatim. This was a new transmission, a chilling continuation of the horror. Orang Medan, this is Widow's Keep Lighthouse. State your exact position. Repeat, state your position. Over. The silence that followed was absolute. No static, no faint distortion, nothing. I pressed the mic button, desperate for a response, but no sound came. No indicator light flickered in confirmation of my transmission. I stared at the black silent speaker. Silas's journal lay open on the small table beside me, his script blurred before my eyes. The words, the hum. It persists, starkly visible. He dismissed the hum too at first, attributed it to the intrinsic mechanics of the light itself. But what if the light, this ancient isolated beacon, was more than just stone and glass and oil, a receiver, a conduit for the lingering of the deep, for the terror that festered beneath the waves? I didn't dare turn off the radio. I couldn't. I just sat there, transfixed, listening to the oppressive silence. Waiting for the crackle to return, waiting for the ghost ship of the Strait of Malacca to call out once more from the frigid, timeless depths that surrounded Widow's Keep. And for the first time, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, I truly understood Silas. And I knew, with a horrifying clarity, that I was no longer alone in this tower. The silence that followed was a torment, woven from dread and incomprehension. I sat motionless, every muscle rigid, my gaze fixed on the radio, willing it to break the stillness, to offer some explanation, however terrifying. The only sounds were the distant, mournful cry of a gull and the relentless. Hours crawled by. The first hint of dawn, a bruised purple stain on the horizon, began to seep into the radio room. My eyes were gritty, my mind a storm of questions. Had I imagined it? Was this the onset of the isolation sickness that preyed on keepers, twisting the mind until reality fractured? Or was something far more sinister at play, something tangible reaching out from the abyss? Just as the sun's rim kissed the distant ocean, the radio crackled again, a sudden, violent tearing that made me jump. The voice was back, and this time, it wasn't fragmented. It was clearer, like a recording played from beneath fathoms of water. And there was more than one voice, interwoven, layered, a chilling chorus of despair that seemed to pluck at my very soul.
Keeper. Thomas. O'Malley.
The words were slow, deliberate. The first voice, the one from the original distress call, but now with a strange resonance. My hand instinctively snatched the microphone, my fingers clammy with a sudden, profound terror. "This is Keeper O'Malley. Who is this? What do you want?" My voice desperate, cracking on the last word. Another voice cut through the static.
The fear. The blinding light. No coordinates.
The sound was laced with an unbearable sorrow, a vast loneliness that seemed to resonate with my own. "The light," I stammered, my eyes darting up the winding staircase to the lamb perch, slowly rotating, catching the nascent sunlight and casting beams across the waters. A deeper, guttural voice joined the spectral chorus.
Cold. The dark. Always the dark. Keeper. Thomas. O'Malley. The light. It calls. Of the lonely. The isolated. Those who stand vigil where land ends and oblivion begins.
A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Silas's journal entries flashed through my mind. Had he felt this too? Had the watch consumed him, drawn him into the same terrifying craze? Who are you? Are you the crew of the Orang Medan? The original voice, the one that had first spoken, returned, filled with a weariness that spoke of suffering beyond human comprehension.
We are. Something strange has been seen on our port side. Something we cannot explain.
The words hung in the air, heavy with dread and unanswered questions.
Orang Medan.
Strange? But
Adrift.
how are you broadcasting?
Bodies.
I pressed, clinging to any shred of logic,
The
any
blinding
rational
light.
explanation for the
No
impossible.
coordinates.
Your vessel,
We are everywhere.
the Orang Medan, sank decades ago. You're in the Strait of
dark.
Malacca, thousands of miles from here, not off Widow's Keep. And I knew, with a horrifying clarity, that I was no longer alone in this tower. The silence that followed was a torment, woven from dread and incomprehension. I sat motionless, every muscle rigid, my gaze fixed on the radio, willing it to break the stillness, to offer some explanation, however terrifying. The only sounds were the distant mournful cry of a gull and the relentless. Hours crawled by. The first hint of dawn, a bruised purple stain on the horizon, began to seep into the radio room. My eyes were gritty, my mind a storm of questions. Had I imagined it? Was this the onset of the isolation sickness that preyed on keepers, twisting the mind until reality fractured? Or was something far more sinister at play, something tangible reaching out from the abyss? Just as the sun's rim kissed the distant ocean, the radio crackled again, a sudden, violent tearing that made me jump. The voice was back, and this time it wasn't fragmented. It was clearer, like a recording played from beneath fathoms of water. And there was more than one voice, interwoven, layered, a chilling chorus of despair that seemed to pluck at my very soul.
Keeper. Thomas. O'Malley.
The words were slow, deliberate, the first voice, the one from the original distress call, but now with a strange resonance. My hand instinctively snatched the microphone, my fingers clammy with a sudden profound terror. "This is Keeper O'Malley. Who is this? What do you want?" My voice desperate, cracking on the last word. Another voice cut through the static.
The light. It calls.
The sound was laced with an unbearable sorrow, a vast loneliness that seemed to resonate with my own. Willing it to break the stillness, to offer some explanation, however terrifying. "The light?" I stammered, my eyes darting up the winding staircase to the lamp perch, slowly rotating, catching the nascent light of the sun and casting beams across the waters. "What about the light? What are you saying?" A deeper, guttural voice joined the spectral chorus.
Of the lonely. The isolated. Those who stand vigil where land ends and oblivion begins.
A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Silas's journal entries flashed through my mind. Had he felt this too? Had the watch consumed him, drawn him into the same terrifying craze? "Who are you? Are you the crew of the Orang Medan?" The original voice, filled with weariness that spoke of suffering beyond human comprehension, returned.
We are. Something strange has been seen on our port side.
A collective sigh seemed to fill the air, a resignation that seeped into the very stone of the tower.
Something we cannot explain. What's this you say? We are still on course.
My gaze snapped up to the lamp, its mechanical rotation suddenly seeming more menacing, more purposeful. On course? It almost seemed as if I was communicating to the operator well before any calamity had occurred.
We have, a freighter. A freighter on our starboard. But something isn't right.
"Operator, what isn't right?" The voice crackled through the static. "Well,
The freighter, it's well. Us.
the Orang Medan." My heart stopped, and a sinking feeling emanated throughout my stomach. Operator, please further explain your current condition.
The Orang Medan. The vessel. It's our vessel. How could this be? Crew have gone up to deck to witness. They're waving to us. And it's us. On the vessel. Orang Medan.
I stumbled to the window, peering out into the morning fog.
I think something isn't right.
The sea was calm, deceptively so. The unsettling calmness of the water contrasted sharply with the turmoil in my mind, and I felt an overwhelming dread settle over me. The light from the lamp cut through the mist, a reassuring beam, but now it felt less like a beacon of safety and more like a probing finger stirring something terrible. Was it the light that called them? Was it the very essence of Widow's Keep, this lonely rock at the edge of oblivion, that acted as a magnet for such horrors? Had Silas become attuned to its true purpose, only to be consumed by the very thing he guarded against? A new terror began to coil in my gut, more paralyzing than the fear of the Orang Medan. If the silence was a presence, and the hum was a conduit, then what did the sudden, absolute silence mean? Had the transmission ceased because the connection was broken? Or had it ceased because the source of the terror, that impossible, time-bending phenomenon, was no longer distant? I looked around the small lamp room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. I was alone. But the stillness screamed that I was anything but. The Orang Medan wasn't a historical anomaly to be read about in old newspapers. It was a lingering echo, and for some reason, it was communicating through my lighthouse. And the implications of its final message, seeing itself, gnawed at me. I walked slowly to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the cold brass handle. The thought of stepping out, of leaving the confines of this room, filled me with dread. The fog outside seemed thicker now, like a shroud drawing in around the keep. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to turn the handle, to step out into the unknown. The winding stairs stretched before me, into the deep, pervasive silence that now felt less like an absence and more like a heavy breath. I was no longer alone in this tower, and as the last vestiges of the terrifying transmission faded from my mind, and a new realization dawned, I descended the staircase. I reached the living quarters, the small room feeling vast and empty. I found myself drawn to Silas's journal yet again, still open on the table. His final scrawls seemed to writhe on the page under the faint pre-dawn light. It persists. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to clear the cobwebs from my mind, to force some semblance of logical thought. The Orang Medan, the Strait of Malacca, thousands of miles away and decades in the past. Yet here in some way on Widow's Keep. They had seen themselves. They had screamed. And then silence. Could it be that the lighthouse, standing for generations against the raging sea, had somehow become a nexus? The thought was absurd, yet it resonated. I moved to the official logbook, my hand hovering over the blank page for the current shift. What could I write? Received distress call from Ghost Ship. They saw themselves portside. Radio then went dead. Lighthouse is now silent. They'd think I'd finally lost my mind. A faint clink, like metal on stone, sounded from the kitchen. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. I hadn't left anything out. I knew I hadn't. Slowly, carefully, I moved towards the kitchen doorway. The light from the window was still weak. As I peered around the frame, my breath caught in my throat. On the small cast-iron stove, next to the unwashed pan from my canned meat and potatoes, sat a single tarnished brass button. It wasn't one of mine. It wasn't from any keeper's uniform I'd ever seen. It was old, crusted with verdigris, and etched with a faint, almost illegible design. Two intertwined anchors. The exact insignia I suddenly remembered from my uncle's recounting of the Orang Medan's maritime company. My mind reeled. It wasn't just a voice on the radio. It was a physical manifestation, a fragment, Had the silence swallowed the Orang Medan, only to spit out pieces of it here in my tower? Widow's Keep wasn't just a lighthouse. It was potentially a grave marker, a monument to things that had passed. And now, I was its unwilling custodian. I stood there, the cold button in my palm. The sun was now fully risen, but its warmth offered no comfort. What would I do? Report the impossible and be deemed insane, or remain silent and risk becoming another vanished keeper of Widow's Keep? The decision weighed heavy. The ocean outside looked deceptively calm, but I knew now that beneath its placid surface, something malevolent was stirring, and the lighthouse, my supposed sanctuary, was its unwilling witness. What I had heard, what I had felt, was not a hallucination born of isolation. It was real, and a terrifying curiosity, intertwined with a desperate need for answers, began to gnaw at me. If the Orang Medan could broadcast from my radio, if it could leave a physical trace in my kitchen, what else could it do? The day passed in a haze of apprehension. I performed my duties mechanically, my gaze drawn to the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. I kept the radio on, a low hiss of static, but the ghost ship remained silent. As dusk approached, I ate a cold, tasteless dinner, my appetite gone. The familiar routine of preparing for the night watch felt like a parody. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I checked the oil levels, cleaned the lens for the final time. The light would soon be fully operational, sending its beam across the darkening waves, and I had a premonition of what it would illuminate. Just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, a strange luminosity began to coalesce on the distant horizon, a faint green glow. It was too far for any normal vessel, too faint for a fishing trawler, and it was moving. Slowly, deliberately, it seemed to glide across the water, growing in size, growing in intensity. It wasn't a trick of the light, no mirage, it was a ship. And as it drew closer, its ghostly outlines solidifying in the dim light, it was unmistakably the Orang Medan. Its silhouette was archaic, a contrast to the modern vessels that occasionally passed this way. No lights shone from its portholes. No sounds of engines or crew drifted across the water. It was a dark, silent hulk, save for that faint, unsettling green aura that seemed to emanate from its very structure, painting the fog that now gathered around it in an unearthly pallor. It drifted to a stop a few hundred yards from the base of Widow's Keep, its bulk looming out of the gathering mist, an impossibly silent leviathan. The lighthouse beam swept over it, illuminating its rusted hull, the rotting lifeboats hanging precariously from their davits, the snapped antenna, the empty bridge. It was exactly as my uncle had described it, a ghost. Every rational fiber of my being screamed at me to stay put, to report this unthinkable apparition to the Coast Guard. But the same force that had compelled Silas to record his unease, the same insidious draw that had manifested a brass button in my kitchen, was now tugging at me, pulling me towards the impossible. The urge to uncover the truth about the ghost ship overwhelmed me, leading me away from safety into the unknown. With each passing second, the pull of the Orang Medan grew stronger, a siren's call that ignited my curiosity and compelled me to act. I knew I was crossing a threshold, stepping into a realm where the past and present intertwined in ways I could scarcely comprehend. As I approached the ghostly vessel, every instinct warned me to turn back, yet my curiosity drove me forward into the unknown. The air was thick with tension, each step echoing in the stillness as I dared to draw closer to the secrets that the Orang Medan held. As I stood there, the reality of the ghost ship enveloped me, a chilling reminder of the past that had come back to haunt the present. I descended the stairs, not to the radio room, but to the small storage shed at the base of the tower. There, nestled amongst spare buoys and fishing gear, was a sturdy wooden rowboat, seldom used but always kept ready. I pulled it free. I secured the oars, checked the bailing bucket, then dragged the boat across the rocky beach towards the water's edge. The tide was low. The air was heavy, humid, yet a biting cold permeated everything. As the rowboat finally floated free, bobbing gently on the dark water, I paused, looking back at the lighthouse. Its beam swept across the Orang Medan, then back to me, then back to the ship, a silent pronouncement of its presence. It felt less like a beacon and more like an accusing finger. I pushed off, the oars dipping into the frigid water with soft splashes. No waves lapped against its hull, no creaks of aged timber, no sounds of movement from within. It was utterly, terrifyingly still. As I drew closer, the details became horrifyingly clear. The rust was thick, almost furry, coating the ship like a cancerous growth. Holes jagged and black marred the superstructure. And then I saw it, in the faint green light, a single dark figure slumped over the railing on the main deck, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, seemingly gazing out at the empty sea. Another, further back, appeared to be frozen in mid-stride, arms outstretched, as if reaching for something that was no longer there. These were the crew, the ones who had died in terror. I reached the side of the Orang Medan. A rusted ladder, partially dislodged, hung precariously over the side. It was an impossible ascent, yet the need to know, to understand, pulled me forward. With trembling hands, I tied the painter of my rowboat to a dangling rope on the ship's side, a rope that felt strangely stiff and unyielding, as if frozen in time. Then I began to climb. The metal rungs were cold and slick with dampness, but my grip was firm, driven by an almost manic focus. I hauled myself over the railing, onto the main deck. The air was heavy, stagnant. The deck itself was eerily intact, considering the ship's age and supposed explosive demise. Rust was everywhere, a deep red, but the general structure seemed sound. The figures I'd seen from the rowboat were closer now, horrifyingly so. They were indeed the crew, frozen in their final moments of terror, contorted into grotesque masks of agony, eyes wide and staring, mouths agape in silent screams. Their arms were indeed outstretched, their bodies twisted into impossible positions, as if caught in a final agonizing spasm. There were no visible wounds, just the pure, unadulterated horror etched onto every feature. Even the ship's dog lay curled near the gangway, its teeth bared in a silent snarl, its body rigid. I moved slowly, cautiously, my feet scraping against the rusted deck. I pushed open a heavy, rusted door leading into the interior of the ship. It opened with a groan, revealing a long, dark corridor. The air inside was even colder, colder than the outside. I fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight I had brought, its beam cutting a stark, jarring swath through the oppressive darkness. The corridor was narrow, lined with closed cabin doors, each one a potential horror waiting to be revealed. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for decades. I reached the chart room. The door hung ajar, revealing an unspeakable horror. The captain slumped over the chart table, his face a rictus of terror, his hand still clutched a pair of dividers. Another officer lay sprawled on the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Just as the radio operator had described. My flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating a single, leather-bound logbook on the table, next to the captain's contorted hand. It was open. My eyes, almost instinctively, focused on the script. It was dated, almost exactly, to the time of the distress call. The final entry, scrawled in frantic, desperate strokes, the light. It calls. It calls from the keep. It watches. It knows. My gaze snapped away from the logbook, and I looked up at the ceiling of the chart room. I knew what it meant. The Orang Medan had not merely passed by Widow's Keep. It had been drawn to it. And the light, my light, was not just a beacon. It was a lure. And I, Thomas O'Malley, was now inextricably linked to this chilling, timeless mystery. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle from beneath the chart table jolted me from my trance. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, settling on a small, huddled form. It was a cat. Not frozen in terror like the crew, but alive. A thin black and white cat, its fur matted and dusty, but its eyes, wide and green, held a flicker of life, of something profoundly out of place in this tomb. It blinked slowly at the sudden light, then let out a weak, raspy meow. Alive. A living creature on this ship of the dead. The impossible weight of the revelation pressed down on me. It was a lifeline, a tangible link to something normal, something breathing, amidst the pervasive horror. Without a second thought, I scooped up the tiny creature. It was bone-thin, but surprisingly warm against my cold, clammy hands. It purred, a tiny rattling sound that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Clutching the cat to my chest, I backed out of the chart room, my mind racing. I felt an urgent need to get back, to escape this impossible vessel. I moved with a newfound urgency, the cat pressed against me, its faint purr a fragile anchor to sanity. Each creak of the rusted deck, each gust of wind sighing through the broken rigging, seemed to chase me. I scrambled down the ladder to my rowboat, my hands clumsy with haste, but the cat remained quiet, a small, trusting weight. As I pushed off from the hull, the rowboat bobbing gently on the dark water, I looked back at the Urung Medan, a meddling relic of the impossible. The Urung Medan began to move. Not under power, not driven by the currents, but with a slow, deliberate grace, it turned its spectral bow towards the open sea. It drifted away from Widow's Keep, becoming fainter, more indistinct with every passing moment, until it was just a faint green shimmer on the horizon, then nothing at all, swallowed once more by the vast, indifferent ocean. I rowed back to the keep, my arms aching, my mind reeling. The cat, safely on board, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. My feet touched the familiar rocky shore. I climbed the rocky stairs to the lighthouse. The first rays of the true sun touched the top of the tower. I was back. And I was not alone. The cat, the living proof of my impossible journey, rubbed its head against my chin, a tiny, vibrating engine of warmth and life. The Urung Medan was gone, but it had left something behind. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that the story of Widow's Keep and of Thomas O'Malley had just truly begun. The cat, who I now realized had a worn leather collar bearing the name Oscar, was becoming increasingly agitated. His green eyes, so like the eerie glow of the Urung Medan, would fixate on the radio, a low growl rumbling in his chest whenever static crackled. I remembered the legend of Unsinkable Sam, a ship's cat who had survived multiple maritime disasters. Could Oscar be something similar? A piece of that lost ship, drawn here, like the transmission, like the button? Then the lighthouse hum intensified, a painful vibration that rattled the very stone of the tower. Oscar arched his back, his fur standing on end, his growl escalating into a hiss. And through the static, a new signal emerged, clearer than before, yet impossibly distorted. It was a vision, not a voice. The fog outside the keep began to swirl, and a shape began to materialize, a vast, dark silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. It was a ship, but unlike the ghostly outline of the Urung Medan, this vessel was pristine, its lights blazing, its decks teeming with figures. It was the RMS Lusitania. The great liner, sunk by a German U-boat in 1915, now floated silently off the shore of Widow's Keep, its brass gleaming, its flag snapping in a non-existent breeze. A gangway extended from its side, impossibly solid, impossibly real. Drawn by a force I couldn't comprehend, I descended to the rowboat, Oscar leaping in beside me, his green eyes fixed on the spectral vessel. As I rowed closer, the music drifted across the water, the sounds of laughter and conversation. It was as if the ship had been plucked from time, its final voyage replaying in an endless loop. I reached the gangway and stepped aboard. The deck was crowded with passengers, dressed in the fashions of a century past. They moved, they spoke, they laughed, but they didn't see me. They didn't acknowledge my presence. I was a ghost among ghosts, a silent observer in their frozen tableau. Then I saw him, a familiar figure standing by the railing, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. It was Silas. He was dressed in the clothes of the early 20th century, a strange, ill-fitting suit, his face pale and drawn, but it was him. "Silas?" I called out. He didn't respond. I moved closer, reaching out to touch his arm. My hand passed through him, a jolt of icy energy that made me recoil. He was as much a ghost as the ship itself. But he was here. And perhaps he held the key to escaping this nightmare. "Silas!" I called again, louder this time.
"We have to get off this ship!" His head snapped up, and his eyes, wide and bloodshot, met mine.
Recognition, slow and agonizing, dawned in them.
Thomas,
He rasped, his voice hoarse, as if unused for a very long time.
you shouldn't be here. No one should be here.
Oscar, sensing the shift, let out a low, insistent meow, rubbing against my leg. Silas's gaze flickered down to the cat, and a flicker of something almost like sanity crossed his face.
Oscar,
He whispered, a tremor in his voice.
you're alive?
"He's with me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Silas, what is this place? How do we get off?" He ran a hand through his matted hair, looking around at the oblivious passengers, a profound weariness etched on his features.
It's the light, Thomas. It acts like bugs to a light. The light calls. It draws us. All of us who stood vigil. All who were lost to the sea's dark embrace. We're echoes, memories. Drawn here by the keep.
He gestured vaguely towards the distant lighthouse, its beam sweeping across the night.
The Lusitania. The Orang Medan. We're all here, forever caught in the moment of our passing, until the light finds anew.
His eyes, fixed on me, held a chilling clarity. "A conduit?" I repeated, my blood running cold. "You mean, a keeper?" Silas nodded slowly.
The silence isn't empty, Thomas. It's filled with the screams that were never heard. The hum isn't mechanical. It's the thrum of lives cut short, echoing through the stone.
He swayed, as if the effort of speaking was too much.
I tried to leave. I tried. But the ship, it holds me. The light, it demands a keeper.
"But you're here now," I pressed, a desperate hope rising within me. "If you can acknowledge me, if Oscar is here, there must be a way out. We can leave, Silas. We can go back to the keep." He shook his head, a mournful expression on his face.
Now I am here and I am not. I exist between the tick of the clock and the crash of the wave. But you, Thomas, you are still tethered to the living world. The light wants you. It wants another keeper for its collection.
Suddenly the phantom music swelled, and the spectral passengers seemed to grow more vibrant, their laughter louder, their conversations more animated. The ship itself seemed to pulse with a faint green light, mirroring the glow of the Orang Medan. A feeling of immense pressure built in the air, a sense of being watched, not by the figures on the ship, but by something far older, far more powerful.
Now,
Silas suddenly cried, his voice regaining a desperate urgency.
follow me. Don't look back.
He sprinted towards the stern, weaving through the spectral crowd, who remained oblivious to his sudden panic.
I didn't hesitate. Clutching Oscar tightly, I pushed my way through the throng, the phantom bodies offering no resistance, yet their presence was like wading through cold water. We reached the stern, and Silas was already fumbling with a small rusted lifeboat, David, surprisingly solid beneath his ethereal touch.
This
He gasped, his breath misting in the cold air.
one, it's the only one that responded to my touch.
He began to lower the lifeboat, its ropes creaking with an ancient bone-chilling sound. I looked back. The vast silent outline of the Lusitania shimmered under the lighthouse beam. The figures on deck were beginning to turn, their expressions of merriment slowly morphing into the familiar, grotesque rictus of terror. They were staring at us, not with anger, but with an agonizing, silent envy. The ship was no longer merely a historical echo. It was a hungry, conscious entity, and it was becoming aware of our defiance.
Hurry, Thomas.
Silas urged, pulling frantically at the ropes. I leapt into the creaking lifeboat, Oscar a warm, trembling weight in my arms. Silas, his form flickering as if caught between two realities, pushed us off the Lusitania's ghostly hull. The ropes groaned, and with a sickening lurch, the lifeboat splashed into the dark water. The Lusitania, instead of receding, seemed to follow, its spectral form gliding effortlessly across the waves. The sounds of its phantom party now a chilling, mocking dirge. The lighthouse beam swept over us, then over the pursuing liner, illuminating the silent terror on the passengers' faces. Oscar, usually calm, was a frantic ball of fur, digging his claws into my jacket. He let out a piercing wail, a sound I hadn't heard from him before, as if in protest or warning. Just as the Lusitania's bow began to ominously swing towards us, a jarring crackle erupted from the small, portable radio I'd instinctively grabbed from the lighthouse. It was the Orang Medan's operator, his voice distorted, fragmented, but unmistakably present. SOS, from Orang Medan. Strange, we see. The keep, it beckons. The haunting words reverberated in my mind, and panic surged through me. The darkness of the sea seemed to close in tighter as I grasped what it meant. There was no time to lose. Silas's voice echoed in my head, urging me to keep rowing, to escape the grip of the keep and the lure of the light. I could feel the light behind me, its pull trying to sway me back towards the ship. Keep rowing, I thought fiercely, focusing on the dark expanse ahead. The pressure of the light grew heavier, an unseen force trying to draw me back into its depths. With every stroke I pushed against it, determined to break free from the grip of the past. I could hear the distant echoes of the past, the laughter turning into cries for help, urging me to look back. But I refused, my resolve hardening as I concentrated on the light ahead. The Lusitania faltered, its spectral pursuit momentarily broken. The green glow that had emanated from its hull flickered, then dimmed. It was as if the two doomed vessels, the Orang Medan and the Lusitania, were now locked in some terrible, unseen struggle for the lighthouse's attention.
Hurry, Thomas, before the light consumes you. Row, Thomas, row, before it claims you too.
Silas breathed. It's weakening. I redoubled my efforts, pulling with desperate strength. The distance to the keep, once seemingly endless, now felt achievable. The hum of the lighthouse pulsed, less a thrumming in my bones and more a frantic beat, like a heart struggling to keep rhythm. As the rowboat scraped against the rocky shore of Widow's Keep, the Lusitania, a shimmering illusion, began to fade. Its lights winked out, its music died, and its ghostly outline dissolved into the swirling fog, leaving only the biting cold and the taste of salt on my tongue. I stumbled out of the boat, pulling Oscar with me, my legs screaming in protest. Silas, a transparent figure, climbed out effortlessly, his gaze fixed on the lighthouse. We did it, I gasped, looking back at the empty, indifferent sea. We got out. Silas didn't answer. He turned to me, his ethereal form wavering.
For now,
He whispered, his voice fading.
the dark deep breaks everyone eventually, Thomas. But you can be strong. You can be strong at the broken place of Widow's Keep. Don't let it take, Thomas. Don't let it take on you. Remember me. Do me that.
He reached out, his translucent hand brushing my arm. A cold shock passed through me, a fleeting glimpse of endless dark water, of suffocating silence, of faces contorted in terror. Then, with a final, mournful sigh, Silas's form dissolved into the pre-dawn mist, leaving only the lingering chill and the profound, familiar silence of Widow's Keep. Oscar, now calm, rubbed against my leg, purring. I looked at the lighthouse, its beams sweeping across the empty sea. The encounter had left me shaken to my core, but with a horrifying certainty. The Orang Medan, the Lusitania, Silas, they were not just historical anomalies. They were manifestations of the lighthouse's true nature. Widow's Keep was a collector of lost souls, a beacon that drew the drowned and the damned to its shores, forever trapping them in a spectral limbo. And I, Thomas O'Malley, was its current, unwilling, and now utterly terrified keeper.